Hello and welcome. Welcome to this video that's going to be, well, kind of a follow-up to the previous video. In that video we unboxed and looked at a lot of used and pre-owned old Kenner Star Wars action figures, which I had bought on an online marketplace. In this video, we will start off by cleaning these figures, and after that we'll take some notes on the missing accessories for the figures and also some notes on the condition of each of the figures. And doing this, we will also place every figure in their own little plastic bag for safe storage. I'm not going to show you all of the footage of me cleaning the figures. It took a couple of hours and I don't think it's that exciting to look at. So I have picked a handful of figures to show you. Alright, let's get started. We are starting out with everybody's favorite protocol droid, which is of course C-3PO. This figure did actually not seem that dirty. It seemed to mainly be covered by a small amount of residue from fingerprints. Of course, fingerprints are rather visible on such a shiny surface, so in any case a wash and a scrubbing is in order. Of course, C-3PO himself might have preferred an oil bath, but this will have to do. Next up we have Bib Fortuna. I removed the cloak before washing the figure, as it's a little more delicate and I wouldn't risk tearing it or even destroying it. Also, I needed to remove it to get to all of the parts of the figure. I actually did end up washing the cloak carefully, but I did it off camera, so I can't show you that. The figure had some grime built up on its face and tentacles, but the rest of it was actually not that dirty. Meanwhile, the dirt that was present had really settled in, so I had to use a sponge to be able to really get in there. This is of course a bit dangerous, as the sponge is a little rougher than the toothbrush, even though it's a previously used sponge, so its texture has been softened somewhat. But I had to be careful not to scratch the figure, and especially when focusing on painted areas, not to scrape or chip off the paint. R2-D2. Not that he is not in need of a cleaning, but I'm guessing the water will ruin the sticker. So for now he will have to wait. So continuing on to Princess Leia in her Boushh disguise. Now this figure had really a lot of grime and dirt, especially in recessed areas and on the feet and boots. So this one took some time to thoroughly clean. It's actually a little more satisfying cleaning the dirtier figures than those that aren't really dirty, because you can really see your progress. I actually ended up letting the figure soak in the water for 5 to 10 minutes, and that seemed to help on some of the more stubborn parts. Doing this cleaning, I'm wondering if some of this dirt dates all the way back to the 80s. And that's actually a little fun to think about, as it also sparks thoughts of some kid playing with the figures and having loads of fun, like I had. What I don't show on this footage is that I, after cleaning the figure in the soapy water, actually rinse it under the tap in clean water before I dry them in this kitchen towel. The Snowtrooper was another one of the more dirtier figures. And like with Leia, in order to loosen up the dirt, I ended up having the Snowtrooper soak in the warm water for some minutes. That seemed to help, but I still had to use the sponge on some of the more persistent grime. So this one again took a lot longer than some of the other figures that had very little dirt. I'm using normal tap water and dishwashing soap. I think harsher chemicals would probably harm the figures. And if this rather mundane combo of dishwashing soap and water can do the trick, there's really no need to take the risk. stickers, now washed, cleaned and dried. Of course, I didn't clean R2-D2 yet. I have ordered some replacement stickers online, and they haven't arrived yet. But I'm also actually still debating with myself whether I should clean him and remove the old, worn and these semi-destroyed stickers and replace them with these new ones that will arrive soon, or if I should keep him in his original state, carefully cleaning the parts that are stickerless. But I guess we will see, and I will get back to you on that in a later video. But anyway, let's start going through them all, one by one, and noting down missing accessories and each figure's condition, and place each one in their own plastic bag for storage. So we will start with C-3PO, the protocol droid. After my first video, I discovered that I couldn't move his right arm, and I didn't want to force it because something might break. Instead I contacted the seller, and apparently the small stud I can show you on the other arm, the small stud like this one on the left arm had broken off sometime in the past on the right one. So now this arm is glued in place. This is of course a little annoying, but seeing that the figures were relatively cheap, I guess it's okay that there are some faults with their conditions. So anyway, besides that, I think the condition of this figure is pretty good. His head is a little bit loose, but that's also okay, I guess. It's not too bad. So let's just make a few notes on this condition. So, right arm is glued in place, and the head is a little loose. And let's also note that this version of C-3PO is from The Empire Strikes Back. they produced this figure in two different finishes, a golden one and a silvery one. I think this is, I think this is the silver one. So I'll make a note of that as well. And in regards to the bag here, that's also in pretty good condition, I think. It's not really harmed in any way, it seems. Okay. So let's find a bag for him. So I'll give each figure their own number for my indexing system. And I guess C-3PO will be figure number 1, which is quite suiting, as he was also the first figure I had when I was a kid. So, number 1, C-3PO. I think a cleaning helped this figure as well. And this is Chief Chirpa, the Ewok chief from the Forest Moon of Endor, from Return of the Jedi, from the first wave of figures from that film. And he's missing his staff and hood, so let's make a note of that. And then of course there's quite a bit of paint that has come off on his belt, and I guess this is a dagger or something. His necklace as well. His eyes are fine, it seems, as well as his teeth, even though they are just a blob of white, but yeah. So on his belt and also on his necklace. Okay. I believe this figure came in 2 variants, or there might have been more, but 2 main variants, where there was a version where the fur was more white and one where it was more greyish. I I think this is the one where it was leaning more towards white. Yeah. Okay. So, trigger number 2. Will be Chief Chirpa. So here we have the Emperor from Return of the Jedi. We actually see the Emperor shortly in The Empire Strikes Back, but they didn't make a figure for that appearance, which of course also only was as a hologram, and it wasn't even the same actor than in The Return of the Jedi. And of course it doesn't really look the same either, not only because of the actors, but the heavy makeup and prosthetics were different in the two films. Of course, later on, the hologram in The Empire Strikes Back was replaced, so now it is Ian McDiarmid who portrayed the Emperor from Return of the Jedi and all other films. Okay, so let's have a look at his condition. He has some paint chips here on his hand, and I also noticed there's a scratch mark here on his leg. Paint chips here as well. Maybe a bit here on his nose has come off, but I guess that's it. So, the Emperor. Paint chips on the hands. And a bit on the nose, and a scratch on his right leg. Of course, I'm missing his cane here, the accessory. Now this figure came in a few different variants. There's one with different hands, that one where they were more detailed and one where they were more soft, I guess. I think these are more detailed. So it's probably the more detailed one. And actually the same for his body. There's a version where it was more soft and one where it was more detailed. And again, I think this is more detailed. So in regards to that, this is the more detailed one. So just know that. And then there also was some different in the coloring. Oh, does he have a mark here? White mark on his shoulder. Let's just note that. Right shoulder. Okay, back to the coloring there. One was darker in the grey here, and one was lighter. Can't really determine, I think, what is what here. But also there was different in the skin color. One being a creamy yellow one, and one being more grey. I think this is grey. Not sure, but I'll note that. Okay, so let's find a bag for him. This is figure number 3, and it's the Emperor. This is an Gamorrean Guard, one of Jabba's brutes from Return of the Jedi. He's missing an axe, so let's start by noting that. So we have some paint chips here in the horns, also a bit on the teeth, on the sandals here, on the soles. Here on the shoulder pads. Perhaps also a bit on the braces, shoulder pad, and up here on this helmet hood thing. miscoloration, plastic issue, these darker spots could be. So let's take a note on these things. So paint chips on horns and teeth, sandals, shoulder pads, braces, and then hood helmet. Yes, and then of course those paint spots or plastic spots, I don't know. There's some spots, but it seems like it's only on that leg and not the other one. There also seem to be a color difference between those two legs. This one over here being more, I don't know, dark green you could call it, and this is the light green. Seems there's the same issue with the arms. This one over here being light green, and this more dark. But I do believe there was also differences in that, in general, different versions of this. So let's note that as well. So light green his right leg and left arm, and dark green the other way around. So yeah. I do believe there was also some differences in the armor, where some were more dull and some were more silvery. Not sure which version this is. Could be more silvery, I guess. And also there were some issues with very clearly marked mold holes, but there aren't any here. They should be here and here, and also here down on the straps on the sandals, but there aren't any, so that's nice. Oh, there's actually one here. I think it's not very visible, but there is one. Not over here though. Okay. Let's find a bag for him. So, this will be figure number 4. This Han Solo from the second half of Return of the Jedi. After he is saved from the clutches of Jabba the Hutt. He's from the second wave of figures from that film from 1984. He's missing his trench coat and his rebel blaster, so those accessories I'll see if I can find online, but let's note that they're missing for now. That was trench coat and rebel blast, right? Okay, so the first thing I notice is that the paint has come off up here on his hair. It has also come off on his hands. Mainly this one where the blaster goes, but also a bit over here on the other one. And this also seems like a small dot here on his vest. And then there's some paint chips here on his behind and on his belt. There's a small scratch here on his right, or rather left cheek. Here there's a scratch, and as with many figures, the paint has come off his boots, his feet. Up here around the rim as well. Okay, let's note those things down. So, paint on his hair, hands, belt, behind, and boots / feet. Okay, and there was a scratch up here on his face and down here on the boot. Right, let's scratch face and boot. Dot on his vest. I think that's it. Now there were some different versions, as with almost all the figures. There was one where he had a more pale face, and the one where he's more pinkish. I think this is definitely one where his face is more pale. Also one where his hair is dark brown. One where his hair is light brown. Not sure what this is leaning toward. Dark brown. And then different colors with the arms and also on the trousers. one version where it was more green and one where it was more grey. And I think this is perhaps leaning towards green in both cases. Yeah, and then there was also a difference in these back pieces, where one were angled towards the center and up towards his head. Don't know if this is one of those. I think it might be. Not sure. Okay, but let's note a few things about this. So, right, greenish color, dark brown hair, pale face, and maybe angled here. Yeah. Okay. So this will be figure number 5. And it's Han Solo in, well, he's supposed to be in a trench coat. At least I think that's the official title. Here we have Klaatu. Well, we have 2 Klaatus. One of Jabba the Hutt's henchmen from Return of the Jedi. From the first wave of figures from 1983. As you might remember from the first video, one of these figures actually had and wore the skirt that originally came with the figure. However, when I removed it, because I didn't want it to come into the water during the cleaning, it actually fell apart somewhat. And some of it even crumbled and almost disintegrated. So I have ended up discarding it. And instead I'll probably see if I can find a replacement for both of them, one for each. So, well, that's one thing that's missing for both of these. And besides that, they're also both missing their Vibro X. So let's note that. So, skirt and Vibro X. So let's look at one figure at a time, actually. So, yeah, paint has come off on the hands, also a bit on the face, mainly the nose. Here on the shoulder, also on the other side, on the boots, here on his bottom, also here a little bit on the belt around his thigh. And then there's some paint mark here, brown paint mark here. Don't know if this is because there's also a green paint mark down here on his sleeve. But it seems like that those are errors from when they actually painted the figure. Not sure. Okay, let's note these things. So, paint missing on the boots and hands, on his thigh belt and face, shoulder pads, and yeah, on his bottom here. And I'll just note some, I call them painting mistakes. Okay. So that's that one. Let's have a look here. Yeah. Just at a glance, it seems like it's the same paint areas. Oh, this is a lot. Where the paint has come off the same, not exactly the same places, but in the same areas. Oh, also here, I think. On his neck. Yeah. Let's note that down as well. So again, it's hands, boots. Also this belt again, right? Yeah. Also his thigh belt. It's not his face. Actually not this face, no. But the shoulder pads. And here. Right. Oh, up here as well. Yeah, the helmet on this one. Yes, the silver color has started to come off. Okay. I think it's quite obvious here that there were different versions, or there are different versions of this figure. As you can see on the head that the paint, the color of the face is different. And it's the same with the brown vest. It's also a different color. You can actually see it here on this figure alone, where the shoulder pad is a different color than the torso and the other shoulder pad. Yeah. So, just noticing now that some of the heel of this figure on both sides actually has come off. Don't know how clearly it is on the video here, but it's quite clear to me. Don't know what has happened to him here, but just note that as well. Okay, so some damage to the feet. Okay. Number 6 and number 7 are Klaatu. Solo from A New Hope. He was released in the first wave of figures in 1978. The first version of this figure had a smaller head, and for some reason Kenner decided that it was too small, so they made this version which, well, it has a bigger head and, well, possibly too big. But all in all, it's, as I mentioned in my first video, and I think the design of this figure is really bad anyway, so yeah, there you go. So before we talk about the condition and have a look at that of the figure, let's just note down that he's missing his blaster. He's supposed to have a rebel blaster. Okay, as you can see, the condition of this figure is, well, it's pretty bad. The sleeves on his shirt are supposed to be white, but the white has almost gone, and it's just this skin color that shines through. And the same for his head, where the skin color also shines through the hair. And here we have a white shirt that, well, it has black spots. I don't know if, because up here it has white spots, and I'm not sure what is going on here. But clearly something is going on. There's also something going on with the belt, because it's not supposed to be white, it's supposed to be black, so why are there white marks here? I don't know if perhaps a previous owner has painted the belt white and then it has chipped off. Perhaps even they have painted the shirt up here white, and it has started to chip off there as well. I don't know. Anyway, he's supposed to have some a red line here going up and down his trouser. That's also missing, been worn off. You can see part of it here on his right leg, but it's almost gone. It's white underneath his feet as well. That's weird. Yeah. And he's a bit worn here on his face, on his nose. And the color here on his neck is way off. Well, anyway. Let's take some notes on the condition. So, paint almost gone on the arms. And all the head, the hair, a lot of the paint is missing. Yes, not sure what I should say about this belt. Let's note that it has white markings, paint markings, even though okay, and then there's the red stripe missing. Let's leave it at that. Yeah, he's in really bad condition. His head is a bit loose, his legs are way loose, and his arms are also rather loose. So let's note that. Legs, arms somewhat, and the head somewhat. Okay. Yeah. this will be figure number 8. And it's Han Solo. A New Hope. Okay, here we have Lando Calrissian in his Skiff guard disguise, which he uses to infiltrate Jabba the Hutt's palace. And that's of course in Return of the Jedi. So he is missing his helmet and he is missing his vibro axe. So let's take a note of that. Okay. So let's see. As usual, some paint has come off on the hands. A bit here on his shoulder pads. On his feet. Here on his bottom. His heels. And yeah, as usual, also some of the hair. But besides that, I can't see any paint that has come off. So, yeah, let's note that. So the differences between the versions of this figure were paint related. There were some different color changes on the torso and the skin and the boots. Some were darker, some were lighter. I think this one falls in the light skin and also light boots and also light torso actually. So no dark versions of the paints. So now I'm also noticing his arm here is a bit loose. Yeah. So loose arm and light paints version. Okay. Calrissian. And it's Skiff. Guard. And disguise. There we go. So here we have Princess Leia in her Boushh disguise. This bounty hunter disguise she used to gain access to Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. There are two accessories missing for this figure. A helmet and a rifle. Okay, so let's have a look at the condition. So there's some markings here and there, like here is a dot and here as well. I don't know if this is the plastic that's generating or what it is. But yeah, there's some paint that has come off here on the hands as usual, and not much down here on the feet and boots, a bit here on the belt, and this chest plate thing, and up here. And on the back here as well. And as usual, also up here on the hair, some paint has come off. Okay, let's make a few notes on that. So, paint come off from hands and on the belt, the chest plate, neck piece, the backpack, and on the hair, and then those dots here and there. Right. So there were actually quite a few different versions, combination of different head sizes and sculpts, and different colored eyes, face, and different degrees of detail on various places, like on the belt here for instance. So I'm not really sure what version this is. It might be a combination of different things, but yeah, I'm not going to note that because there can be so many. But let's find a bag for her. Okay, so this will be figure number 10. And that's Princess Leia Organa. And it's Boushh disguise. Yeah. Okay, here we have the rebel soldier in Hoth battle gear, and he's of course from The Empire Strikes Back, from the first wave of figures from that movie from 1980. And he's supposed to have a Bespin blaster, which is missing. So, let's see his condition. There's some paint that has come off here at his bottom, and as usual here on the feet. There's a bit up here on this emblem thing, and here on these, not sure what those are, also on the belt. Yeah, on the buttons on these belt bags, here at the low end of his tunic, yeah, and up here on this small bag on his head here, yeah, all the usual raised places, here a bit. Okay, so that's paint marks. No, paint come off on his bottom, his boots, belt, and emblem. These small boxes, belt bags, lower part of tunic. Yes, and up here on his back, on his head. There's also a bit here on his neck scarf, just beneath his chin. Okay, and this arm here is rather loose. legs are fine. Also the head. So. Okay, like the Leia one we just looked at, this one also came in quite a few different versions, where there were different style of this emblem up here on his tunic, different style down here on these lines, some straight, some more curved ones, and then also up here on the scarf, two different versions. This is more the soft one, I think. And then there were also different versions of brown, some darker, some lighter. Don't know what version this is. I believe there were also some different versions. The legs was sculpted in brown plastic and then the white was painted on. And in other versions it was the other way around. And since the paint has come off here on the boots, the brown paint, that leads me to conclude that these are sculpted in white plastic with brown paint. Yeah, let's find a bag for this guy. Okay, so he will be number 11. That's Rebel. Soldier. And Hoth. Battle gear. Right. Here we have Ree-Yees, who worked for Jabba the Hutt in Return of the Jedi. Let's see, there's some paint chips here, there on the bottom, on the elbow, also on this elbow. I'm not sure there's paint chips here on his feet or if they're paint mistakes. I'm leaning to that being paint mistakes. Of course, here on the eyes, the black seems to have worn off a bit. Yeah. Okay. So, paint has come off on his eyes and his shoulder, and the elbow. Let's note some paint mistakes. Oh, and paint has come off of the eyes, of course. Yeah, and of course he is missing his rifle, so I'll make a note on that. Now there were some, as with the other figures, some different versions. I think there were two versions in regards to the plastic. Either it was brown or either it was flesh colored, and then the flesh was painted on or the clothes were painted on. And since the cloth has chipped off here and there, seems like it is the flesh that's the plastic color. Yeah. I'm not sure if this is, I think this is a paint mistake actually, because I don't think they molded his legs in this color, which means that this wouldn't have chipped off, revealing the light grey color. Of course, I'm not sure. Anyway. So this is figure number 12, and that's Ree-Yees. Okay, here we have the Snowtrooper, or an Imperial Stormtrooper in Hoth battle gear, as he was known when he was released. And he's from The Empire Strikes Back, from the first wave of figures from that movie, from 1980. He's missing his rifle. I believe it's called an Imperial Hoth rifle. And he is also missing his skirt, which should cover his hind legs. Now, in regards to condition, his legs are a little loose. Not too much, but a little. His arms are fine. There's a bit paint chip off here on the black up here on his. That must be his left arm. But besides that, not sure if in this round one at the top if there's a bit paint that has come off in here, or it's simply just a bad paint job. bit here on either side of the... I don't know what this is, but the black box here. Here there's a bit as well, or either again it's a bad paint job. It's difficult to determine. Okay, so let's note. Right, we have missing equipment, a rifle, and skirt. And then we have paint that has come off by left shoulder. And different locations on the black. Now a final thing concerning the condition is of course the miscoloration on the torso and his head of the plastic that has gone a bit yellow. So let's note that. Okay. Now in regard to versions, there's two different versions, I believe. One where the sculpting is more soft and one where it's more detailed. I think this is more detailed. There's also different versions in regards to the eyes and the black. In some versions there's no separation in the black color between the eyes. Of course here it's separated. Okay. Let's find him a bag. So he'll be number 13. I'll call him a Snowtrooper. Alright. Okay, here we have the ATST driver, pilot of the all-terrain scout transport, and he's from Return of the Jedi, from the second wave of figures from that film released in 1984. Of course we briefly see the ATSTs in The Empire Strikes Back, but we do not see the drivers / pilots. He's supposed to have an indoor blaster, so that is missing. Indoor blaster. Now looking at his condition, it's obvious that there are paint chips on the hands, on these gloves here as well, on his belt and on his boots. These emblems have more or less come off. His nose has a paint chip. There are a few dark dots on his helmet. Don't know if that's the plastic or what. And there's also some dark dots here and there on his uniform. Again, I'm not sure if that's the plastic or painting mistakes, or even me not being thoroughly enough when washing him. But I don't think so. Okay, let's note some of these painting things down. So, boots. Gloves, belt, and his nose. And then the emblems have almost worn off on both shoulders. And I'll just note black dots here and there. Yeah. But his limbs are okay, so no problems there. Now in regards to versions, there were some different colored versions. Some helmets were darker than others. Not sure if this is a light or a dark helmet. Also, there were some different degrees of glossiness versus matte paint on the black part. I don't think this is that glossy, but I can't be sure. And there also some were more dark in this suit area, jumpsuit area. Again, I'm not sure which one this is. I think it's the lighter one. There were also differences in the rotation of the emblems, but as I really can't see them, they're very difficult to determine. Yeah. So this will be number 14. At ST driver. so here we have another Princess Leia Organa. This version's called Indoor Combat Poncho, indicating, of course, the missing combat poncho. She's also missing the belt, which is supposed to hold the combat poncho in place, as well as a helmet and a blaster. So let's note that. So, missing combat poncho, belt, helmet, and blaster. Right, looking at her condition, overall in pretty good condition. I think there's a bit down here on her boots where the paint has come off on the heels. Here's some markings as well. A bit here on the front on the toes. Bits of scratch marks here on that pelvis area and bottom area. Oh, and here the paint has come off here on the bottom. It's difficult to see. I think if there's are there any problems with her hair? No, not really. Perhaps a little. Okay, so that worn paint on boots. And on her bottom. Let's note here just a bit, and then some scratch marks. I'll call them scratch marks. Right. Yeah, but no loose limbs, so that's nice. In regards to different versions, I'm not really sure how different they were. I know that there was one difference, and that was in these ribs on her back, where there was a version where they were more pointed towards the middle and down, and this is not that version. Yeah. Okay, so she will be Okay, so this is the AT&T driver, or AT-AT driver, and he's pilot, or driver, if you like, of the all-terrain armored transport. He's from the Empire Strikes Back, from the third waves of figures from that film, released in 1981. And yeah, he's missing a rifle, so missing accessories, a rifle. So his condition, well, there's some paint that has come off on his gloves and shoulders. Yeah, and his bottom here, and also here in the front. And of course the orange areas. Here the paint has also come off, including the emblems up here. And some of the black. Here these small round ones. Up here on top of his helmet. And these on each side. Here as well. Which of course is supposed to be orange here as well. This is almost gone as the other places. Okay, so he has seen some action, this guy. I don't know if is this dirt or is this, can't see, or errors in the faults in the plastic. I might not have been thorough enough with the cleaning. I'll get back to that after the video. It looks more like dirt than problems with the plastic, I think. Oh, there's some scratches here. Oh, I'm looking closer now, also here on his bottom. Yeah, okay, let's note these things. So, worn paint on the gloves, shoulders, orange parts, and well, black parts. And then on his bottom, and is this the pelvis? I'll call it the pelvis. And here, right, and then some scratch marks on the bottom and hind legs. Yeah, here as well, on that side. And yeah, his legs are, well, they're loose. His arms also a little in their default position. Not so much up here, but yeah. So that's loose legs and arms. Okay. So in regards to different versions, the only thing I can find of information is that there are different versions of the orange color, where some were darker and some were more light. But since the orange color has almost gone here on the sky, well, there's supposed to be orange here and here. Besides the emblems, it's rather difficult to determine which version this was. Well, but nevertheless, I'll just go right now and see if I can clean this before I put him in a bag. So, I'll be right back. So, here I'm back, and I think it helped. His boots were a bit dirty still, but that seems to help now. So now he can be put in a bag. So he'll be number 16. And at driver. So, last figure is Bib Fortuna, and let's have a look at him before I put the cloak back on him. He's supposed to wear a big belt, which is not here, and then he's also missing a staff. So let's note that. Missing belt and staff. Okay, so in regards to his condition, his torso is actually somewhat of a different color than his limbs. And then there's some paint that has come off on his fingers here, both hands, and also on these braces. And then there's some paint splashes here on his left elbow. So let's know that. So the fingers and the braces. And some paint splatter. It seems like there are scratch marks here on his legs. On both sides. So, scratch marks. Both legs. Okay, let's put the cloak back on. rustling around a bit here. I think I managed to get the cloak back in place. I think that the cloak on the Bib Fortuna I had when I was a kid was more fluffy than this one. And doing some research online, I have also found out that there were different versions of the cloak and of the fabric. So, yeah, I probably had a different one. And speaking of different versions, there were different versions of his, of the color of his eyes and lips. Some were more bright and some were more pale. I think this is the more pale one. Yeah. So, let's find a bag for him. Number 17. Bib Fortuna. So that's all the figures cleaned and bagged. Of course, with the exception of R2-D2, as mentioned. We'll wait with having a look at him in one of my next videos. And as mentioned in my previous video where we had the first look at these figures, I now see if I can find any of the missing accessories online. I think there's a good chance of that. And I'll follow up on that in some of my next videos. For now, I will say thank you for watching. And if you have any comments or feedback or corrections, please leave me a comment. And then I'll see you in my next video.